Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to show you my first purchase of a broken Acer Aspire V15 notebook with an integrated Intel Core i7 and a 4K display panel. The condition is as for parts are not working. So today I'm going to inspect what is wrong with this laptop. You can see that it has a power adapter included, which is sadly not original, but that's not a problem. It seems to be working just fine. The notebook came in a good packaging, so it didn't have any damages from transportation or else. Now is also the good time to mention that the seller wanted 250 euros for his laptop, but I offered him 200 euros and he accepted. This laptop also comes with an NVIDIA GTX 960M to power the 4K display panel, which is also IPS. So I wanted to turn on the notebook to see if it still was working, but I discovered soon that the battery was empty and then I had to plug in the power adapter. The seller told me that the notebook wasn't booting, but I could see in his photos that the screen was still working fine, because it displayed the same error message that I now get with the power cable plugged in. After turning the laptop on, you could see the red lights of the keyboard flashing. Also, for a split second there was the Acer logo, but shortly after that followed the error message "No bootable device", which means that either the HDD is corrupted or the HDD is missing, containing the operating system, which means the BIOS can't find a system to boot from. However, I still managed to get into the BIOS by pressing multiple times F2 after starting the laptop. There you could see the following specs. So it had an Intel Core i7 from the Haswell generation, which is a bit older now. There was also 16 gigs of RAM, and the keyboard was still in a pretty good condition, so there were no marks or anything like that on the keyboard. Also, I noticed in the BIOS that the HDD wasn't showing up, which means the HDD was either not working, or the fault was in the mainboard, or there is an error in the cable. On the close-up shot of the video you can see that this notebook has a 4K Ultra HD panel. So you can see that there is also some dust on the display panel and also on the casing of the notebook. I decided to clean the notebook for a little bit. The missing disk on the BIOS had me worrying that there wasn't an HDD, because the description of the seller wasn't that good, or he didn't specify what was wrong with the computer, he just showed the error message he got. Moving on, I decided to open up the notebook to see what I was dealing with. And to my surprise, you could see some things that were wrong with this notebook. With my iFixit kit, I could easily remove the screws from the under housing of this notebook, and there were some complications at first how to open it, but looking up at YouTube I could see how to open it and there wasn't such a hassle after all, but still it was a little bit embarrassing for me. While opening up the underhousing, I discovered some damages to it. So there were a crack on the screw, and also on the LAN port there were some bigger cracks, which means that it wasn't handled very good after all. You can also see that the monitor hinge is somewhat open, which isn't a good sign of proper use of the notebook, and there's also a risk of the hinge breaking. So moving on, I used my plastic pick to pick open the part between the casing and the keyboard itself, and I'd like to mention that this is the wrong way of doing it. You need to open your laptop and remove the keyboard panel from the housing, and not in this order like I did it in the first time. I'd also like to emphasize the importance of looking up stuff before you actually do it, because there may be some important steps in the future that you need to do, and it's sometimes maybe too late to do them. So if you already have a rough idea of what you're dealing with, it is easier to operate such repairs. After following a teardown guide on YouTube, which I will put in the description, I managed to open up the notebook. So after taking apart the keyboard, I had to remove the 3 ribbon cables which were attached to the mainboard. Be careful, if you just pull out the keyboard without removing them, you may break the connectors and also lose the function of a keyboard, of a touchpad, etc. Let's see what awaits us under this notebook. So here you can see me removing those mentioned flex cables. And now there were some first surprises, to be honest with you. There was a random screw attached to the keyboard. And after opening up, you can already see that there's the 2.5-inch HDD missing. And also some of it is completely not there, like the SD card reader, or also the cable from the HDD to the mainboard. After doing some cleaning, I concluded that this laptop was pretty clean inside. There were some little dust particles, but they weren't impacting on the performance of this notebook. You can see there's a crack on the HDMI port, which is pretty common because this is such a small piece of plastic that easily breaks after a short period of time. Where here should be the HDD cable which connects the 2.5-inch drive with the mainboard, but it isn't there. So instead of ordering the flex cable for the drive, I decided to use my spare M.2 NVMe SSD. But I'd also already read that this drive wouldn't work on this old PC, because it's an NVMe PCIe Express card, or just PCIe card, and this notebook only supports M.2 SATA SSDs. So let's try it again. I didn't know at the time if there was still an operating system on this card or not, but I discovered that this laptop wouldn't recognize it either way, because it didn't show up in the BIOS. So I still wasn't satisfied with my experience with this laptop, and I didn't want to wait until I received the second M.2 drive. I decided to install Elementary OS, which is a Linux distribution, on a live USB stick. So if I use my USB stick plugged in this notebook, I can use an operating system on it without having an HDD installed. And to my surprise, it worked just fine, and I was pretty happy about it. There were many connections that I had to make before even being able to operate this notebook. I had to plug in the power cable because the battery was showing 0% and the notebook would power off if I unplug it from the power cord. As well as 3 populated USB ports, one for the live USB, the second one for the keyboard, and the third one for the mouse that I had to use to complete the setup. So gladly, Elementary OS was working without any problems. I didn't see any screen flickering or any graphical issues. So for my next video, I was ordering something off Amazon Prime. It had to come within 1 day, and I decided to buy an M.2 SATA SSD with 500 GB of storage space. This Intenso SSD isn't as fast as the common Samsung EVOS 860 Pros or 870 or even some NVMe SSDs, but you can clearly see a difference between these SSDs that are entry level and also some SATA HDDs. And also I couldn't use SATA HDDs because I didn't have a flex cable for the mainboard. In the next video we are going to install Windows, an SSD, a Wi-Fi card and fix some graphical problems. I hope I see you next time. Thanks for watching.